Huge thanks to the organizers for bringing us out again, and we're excited to talk to you guys about all things Black Panther.
Yeah, for sure. There we go.
Yeah.
So today, we're talking about Black Panther. You guys just watched the Black Panther movie, right? I mean, can I give it up for the Black Panther? So dope.
It's pretty cool, right?
So dope. Yeah, so when we're thinking about the Panther, obviously there's a lot that goes into this character. So Arien, first, let's take a little bit of a background approach to this. Give us a little bit of background about who this person is.
Sure. So historically, he was originally created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in 1966. So the character's been around for a while. And he was actually the first African-American superhero to appear in mainstream comics, and also the first superhero to be gifted with superpowers from an African-American perspective. And, as far as his powers and abilities go, you saw a lot in the movie that's reflected, but just as a recap, he's obviously got super strength, he's got agility, he's got speed, he also is of a genius intellect, he is rich. Some could consider that a superpower. I'm certainly not rich, so I sometimes think of that as a superpower.
I wish I had that superpower.
He's a combat expert. He has enhanced senses. So one thing that's really cool in the comic books is he can smell fear, and he can even smell if you're lying to him just by the change in your body odor. A little gross, but also super interesting and useful, right? You can't get anything by him. And last but not least, he's also got access to what's kind of described as the Panther Knowledge. So basically anyone that was a Black Panther before him, he has access to the wisdom and the strength of all of those people that came before in that lineage.
Awesome. So, when we're looking in the Black Panther movie that you guys just saw, we actually get our first in-depth look at Wakanda as a place. And I think it's just so amazing to take a look at all of the diverse cultures, the crazy technology, that we see. And so just to sort of summarize, Arien, tell us who are all these different people that are interacting in Wakanda and in the different purposes that they serve in the civilization?
Yeah, so you can't talk about Black Panther without talking about Wakanda because it's its own character, if you will. And the Wakandan culture has always, from day one in that first issue in Fantastic Four, been shrouded in mystery, but also just this technologically advanced society that other people outside of the realm aren't even aware of. And, even just from a historical context, taking a step back, sometimes it's interesting to think about the continent of Africa and its successes. There's parallels in the real world where if you look at civilizations such as ancient Egypt, they were far more technologically superior in the realm of astronomy and surgery and engineering in their day. And so even though Wakanda is a fictional place, we do have some historical context of where some of those ideas come into play in our own reality. But when you think about the Wakandans as a civilization, it's important to know a couple of things. One, they revere their history and the story of their people. Number two, they revere this sense of self-determinism and sort of self-sustenance, right? They practice the sense of self-isolationism, and they are a self-sustaining people. And I think the third point there is that there's also this natural reverence for nature and harmony. And so you see that in the way the people interact with each other too. Even though they're divided by tribes, each tribe forms a specific role that they kind of carry out in society. So you have the mining tribe, which is responsible for the mining of Vibranium. You have the merchant tribe, which is responsible for the commerce of the society. You have the river tribe, which manages the flow of product up and down the entire geographic region. You have the border tribe, which sort of kind of conceals their strength on the outside. They look like they're just, kind of casual, everyday sheep herders.
Yeah, and they also protect the border.
But they protect the border, right? Because those are the ones that are in command of those war rhinoceros that we saw in the movie. And you have the Jabari tribe. They have chosen to kind of take a path more of self-isolationism, right? So they have separated from society. They don't use vibranium within their own culture, so they're kind of the outsiders. But you also have the priests, which are in charge of all of the ritualistic things that happen within the society. And you have the Dora Milaje, and that's the King's Royal Guard, the royal family's royal guard. And of course, the royal family, whichever Wakandan is in charge, they comprise the royal family. And that is basically achieved through trial by combat, which you guys all saw.
Yeah. So when I'm thinking about Wakanda, right, I mean, we get this look at this amazing, incredible place that, it's this beautiful city and all these different people are interacting. It's super advanced technology, but also it's in balance with the nature around it. And the technology itself is actually inspired by a lot of this nature. And here in the real world, there's an entire field of applied sciences that pulls inspiration from the natural world in order to solve problems that are meaningful to us as humans. And this is called biomimetics. So to get a deeper insight into this idea of biomimetics, I reached out to a friend of mine, Billy Allman, who's a designer for theme park attractions, and he's also the host of an upcoming show on Animal Planet. And he's also finishing up his master's degree in biomimicry right now. So let's hear a little bit about what he has to say about biomimicry. Oh, no. No. Sorry. Oh, is it this one? There we go. So as somebody who spends your time thinking about architecture and engineering and biomimicry, how do you see this play out in Black Panther?
One of the first things that struck me about Black Panther was how so much of their technology is biomimetic, or you can see right away some of the inspiration that the production designer Hannah Beekler and their whole design team saw in nature in some of the awesome technology that you see in the film. One of the things about Black Panther in the mythology is that the Wakandan society kind of emerged as an agricultural society. So they already had this, very distinct connection to nature. And once they started cultivating and developing and experimenting with Vibranium, the kind of indestructible metal that is only found in Wakanda, once they started experimenting with that, a lot of their inspiration was also based on their agricultural history and background. So a lot of the technology that they were already inherently developing was also based on organisms that they were familiar with as farmers, agriculturalists, and botanists. One of the most obvious and really cool ways that you see it is actually in the fact that some of the ships that you see are modeled after insects. When you think of the Black Panther suit, there's so many things that are simple nuances but allude to biomimicry. I mean, everything from the way that the claws retract on his suit to, even if you look at some of the finer details of even like the eyelids of his masks, there's just all of these amazing little hints and details of this inspiration from nature that are just peppered throughout the entire film.
Why do you think that this intersection of inspiration and application, art and technology, what does it give us and why is it so important right now?
When you look at where things are in the design world right now, we've got additive manufacturing, we've got rapid prototyping, we've got autonomous robots that are automating so many different things now. When you look at all of those things in design and innovation, it's all about making things more efficient and better. And when you contrast that against the 3.8 billion years that life has been on this planet, you realize that nature has been doing those same things of finding new ways to make things more efficient through natural selection and evolution for way longer. And so when you look at nature through that lens, you realize that we basically got a planet full of creatures that have been performing research and development for millions of years longer than we've been around. And why should we kind of try and reinvent the wheel when some of these organisms have already done the legwork for us?
And so I think that's a really cool perspective on engineering and design. And obviously, like if we take a closer look at what we see in the movie, a lot of their technology, especially the flyers, are very directly built to mimic animals that occur in that environment. Right. So when we look at at the really like sort of fast and darty flyers that they've built, they look very much like a dragonfly. And there's a reason, right? It's not just like, oh, I like what a dragonfly looks like, so I'm gonna make something that flies that looks like a dragonfly. But that design, it serves a very specific purpose. Dragonflies are one of the most efficient hunters on the planet. That's because they're extremely good at maneuvering at high speeds. They're really, really fast, which allows them to pick out prey mid-air. And those are like really great properties to have if you're trying to build, something that's really fast and really dodgy in order to say like fight your enemies. But then on the flip side, you also have these other set of flyers that are a little bit more bulky. They can carry a lot more stuff, which makes them really heavy. And that you run into a problem of efficiency, right? With all of that bulk, you expend a lot of energy, and energy is expensive for the most part. But also insects have gone about trying to solve this problem as well. So beetles are extremely heavy, given their ability to fly. In this, what we're seeing here is a Goliath beetle, which is like one of the heaviest insects on the planet. And they have to deal with the same problem, right? They're super heavy and it takes energy for them to fly. And for them, like not having that energy, not being able to fly means the difference between life or death. So there are a lot of scientists now that are looking at the efficiency of flight in these big, bulky creatures. And we see that mimicked in the Black Panther movie. But we also see biomimicry very clearly in T'Challa's suit. So, for instance, we see the stealthy footwear that Shuri, his sister and head scientist in Wakanda, makes for him.
And what are these?
The real question is, what are those? Why do you have your toes out in my lap?
But you don't like my royal sandals. I wanted to go old school for my first day.
Yeah, I bet the elders loved that. Try them on. Fully automated, like the old American movie Baba used to watch. And I made them completely sound absorbent.
Interesting.
Guess what I call them? Sneakers. Because you... Never mind.
Yeah, so the sneakers, I think that was like one of the best scenes in the movie. And also, I gotta say that the moment where she asks him why he has his toes out in her lab is like the realest moment in the entire movie. As a scientist with a lab myself, I can definitely, I hear where she's coming from. But anyway, those silent shoes, again, this is very similar to the animal that T'Challa gets his namesake from, like the Black Panther. So, these are really heavy animals. They're really bulky, but they also have to move around these really dense environments, right? And there's a lot of foliage that can make a lot of noise. And one of the things that helps them is the specialized morphology of their paws, right? So they have this really thick padding and this really thick fur around their paws that help to sort of dissipate sound and dissipate pressure, and it helps them to move more silently through their environments. We also see the retractable claws that T'Challa has, which are very important. Like we see him mess all kinds of people up with those throughout the Marvel multiverse. And these retractable claws, again, are very special to felines, right? So not every animal, there are a lot of animals that have claws, but not all of them are retractable. And felines are one of the very few lineages that actually have these retractable claws. And it's a really interesting adaptation because basically, what they've done is they've taken the very last digit of their feet and they've made it into a switchblade, right? So that entire digit folds back and up into the next digit behind it, and there's a specialized tendon that then pulls that digit out in order for them to retract their claws. So given the the stealth and the claws, like we also see that the very fighting style of T'Challa as the Black Panther is it's very inspired by the namesake, by the Black Panther, right? This really interesting combination of stealth and strength and agility, right? This is what defines the Black Panther as a superhero. But then also on the other side of the equation, we have Killmonger. And we see he has all these scars when he takes off his the first scene when he takes off his shirt, he has like all these scars, and for him it was sort of you think he has a scar for every life he's taken or something like that, but this design, this aspect of the character was based on scarification rituals of the Chambri people of Papua New Guinea, and this is a rite of passage to manhood for these people. And the reason why they do this, or like the raised flesh that comes from this, is their ode to the largest apex predator in their environment, which is the New Guinea crocodile, Crocodilus novaguineae, which has these raised bumps, right? So by them doing this scarification ritual, they can adopt the strength of this animal that they admire so much. But then if we take a step back and we look at Wakanda again as a whole, this super advanced civilization, they've gone about technologically advancing in a very different way than we see in our own world, right? So even though they are really advanced, they're also very attuned to their environment and their history and how they live. They have to be, because they've been so isolated for so long. A lot of their advancements, a lot of their growth is built on what is there, right? Because they're not really importing things, they're not really exporting things. So they have to really think carefully about how to conserve the resources that they have and how to renew a lot of the resources that they have. So I asked Billy a little bit about this and how we see it in the movie. Let's hear what he has to say.
If you looked at the buildings that a lot of the city design in the film, all of those things, you had skyscrapers that were made out of, yes, they were made out of vibranium, or they had vibranium elements to it, but they were skyscrapers made out of natural materials that you could locally find within that setting and that ecology. You had adaptive technology, the way that we have designed things since the Industrial Revolution has been things that are durable and can withstand and are long lasting and don't change and are rigid. And that's not how nature designs things at all. Nature designs things to bend but not necessarily break, to be recycled, to be adaptive. And now we're seeing that all of our designs need to have those same elements in it. And so that was one thing that I loved about, the Wakandan designs that I was seeing, this sense of modularity and this additive quality to them. The fact that the film basically starts with an ecology lesson of how, this mineral crashed into this planet and irradiated, the entire, ecology of this region to the point where everything was affected by it. And the fact that they found this resource and, have just scratched the surface of its brilliance. But they recycle every single bit of it. None of the vibranium was wasted. They found new ways to take the vibranium pieces that they didn't use to create fabrics, or when you go back to the film, you realize that their holographs were made out of sand. Sand from the mine, right? So every single little bit of material was not wasted, and that was something that I recall an interview with Ryan Coogler where he was saying that was something that when he traveled to the continent, that he realized that there was this ingenuity to how things were recycled and repurposed whenever he was traveling throughout Africa, and to see that manifest in a futuristic, holistic way was like super impressive.
So now when we look at Wakanda as a super advanced technology, we can, a super advanced technological civilization, we can contrast that to, the most advanced technological civilizations here in our world, on our planet. And there's this really stark difference between the two, and the fact that, we are not very well connected with nature, especially in, really population dense areas. And I think Wakanda in that sense offers this really interesting inspiration for how to build an advanced civilization that is still in harmony with the environment in which it exists.
Yeah, I'd say the model of sustainability that they've presented is the inspiration, but how can we get there with what we have in our world? Because an element like vibranium doesn't exist, right? That's a fictional thing that's been made up in the MCU. It powers the technology, it powers the weaponry, it powers the clothing and the armor of the characters that we encounter in the comics and in the movies. And it can even conduct, store, and release energy. And it's been implemented with a couple of other characters in the Marvel universe as well. So Captain America's shield, for instance, is made of vibranium, which is awesome. If you watched the Infinity War movie, the character Bucky, Winter Soldier, his arm was replaced by T'Challa's people with a vibranium arm. So they're finding uses to incorporate it from sort of an outsider perspective. But since vibranium isn't real, I guess the question becomes, is there even an element or an idea out there that sort of models the properties and things that vibranium can do in the comic world?
Yeah, exactly. And so when I'm thinking about vibranium, I'm thinking about two main things. Like, one is the strength of the material. Like, we see that it's just extremely resilient. So in our universe, we're looking for the single strongest material there is. We get to graphene, carbon nanotubes, right? These are typically artificially made, but these are the strongest materials that we know of. And we're talking about materials that are like 10 times stronger than steel, right? For the same, at the same diameter. And not only that, but it also has these really interesting properties of, it's a good thermal conductor, it's a good electric conductor. So it provides like some versatility for a bunch of different functions, kind of similar to what we see in, with vibranium in the movie. But vibranium also has this other super interesting characteristic, and that's its ability to store and release energy. And we see that with T'Challa's new suit, when he can, get into a fight, like takes all of this punishment and all of that kinetic energy is stored, and then he releases it in this, this sort of shock wave. So we see that again sort of play out in Shuri's lab.
Strike it.
Anyway.
Mm-hmm. Not that hard, genius.
You told me to strike it. You didn't say how hard.
I invite you to my lab, and you just kick things around.
Well, maybe you should make it a little stronger. Hey, wait a minute.
The nanites absorb the kinetic energy and hold it in place for redistribution.
Very nice.
Strike it again in the same spot.
You're recording?
For research purposes.
Delete that footage.
This seems like something that's pure science fiction. So in order to get a better feel for, if there's any sort of actual physical process in our universe that mimics this, what we see on the screen, I reached out to another scientist, Dr. Sebastian Alvarez at the City University of New York. Sebastian is a biologist, but he's also a movie consultant, and he's also the author of a new book called The Science of Marvel, From Infinity Stones to Iron Man's Armor, The Real Science Behind the MCU Revealed. And I asked Sebastian about this unique energetic property of vibranium, and he provided me with this really, really interesting answer.
I kind of like this idea of transferring like this kinetic energy into some sort of electric form that can be used at a miniaturized level for something else. So I'm thinking about like basically every time T'Challa would get one of those hits when he's taking on the Border Tribe, and then after the Rhinos, and then after he's taking on Killmonger, there's this this purple glow that kind of accumulates in his suit. And it's great because when you're watching the movie, you're kind of like, oh, he's getting more purple, and it gets, it's going to turn into this one moment where everything kind of just, the odds are against him, everyone's stacked up on top of him, and then he just blows everybody away. And what I liked about that is this kind of idea that he could kind of have these piezoelectric shells that can turn this kinetic energy into some sort of stored form of electricity that could kind of fuel some sort of other device that would create these shock waves.
So what is piezoelectricity?
We usually see it in the form of a piezoelectric crystal. So there's some sort of asymmetry and symmetry that exists within these crystals that when you squeeze them, they can displace an electric charge throughout the crystal, and that displacement is what creates this current. So they have this very unique structure that you can see, and they're used to kind of charge the flashing light you see in kids' shoes. I don't know if you've seen kids running around and you see this little flashing light that kind of goes off.
Yeah.
That's usually due to these piezoelectric electricity that comes from those little devices. So they're used for toys for the most part, and they probably would never be able to get as much energy as you kind of see in the Black Panther suit, but it's kind of a neat concept where the deformation of this crystal structure can create an electric current. And then if we couple that electric current to some sort of other device, we can develop all kinds of smart textiles. In fact, I think that's the current, that's part of the current research of these materials, is to kind of figure out ways in which, the clothes you're wearing themselves can be used to, let's say, power up your cell phone or something like that.
So wait, are these like the old school like British knight shoes that would like light up or something like
I
that?
think it's like, like the, I guess they were like Keds or something. I forget what the company was, but, I remember I had a pair when I was like 7, and I remember like tying them up. And then I just like, hopping down the road.
Yeah,
and then, you beg your mom to go out at night so everybody could see your light up shoes.
Yeah, it was always like, because you'd wear them, but then you'd have to ask somebody else if they're working, right? Like, you can't like check yourself. You're just like,
You
lit?
see it?
And you're like,
You
it's
see
lit,
it?
right? Yep. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so it's interesting to think that, that technology that we use for such, sort of fun and simple purposes, under the right conditions with the right, inspiration and technological innovation could be, scaled up to see what we see on the screen. Cool. Yeah. And so Sebastian's last name is Alvarado. I think I said Alvarez for some reason, but it's Alvarado. My apologies. But obviously, so that is the technology. Obviously, we have the cultural setting in which that technology exists, but not just anybody can put on the suit. Right? I mean, like if I were to put on the Black Panther suit, as much as I like to think I'd be, a bad man, like I can't be the Panther. Well, maybe I could be the Panther.
You could. You're pretty big.
When we're thinking about the population of Wakandans themselves, I mean, this is a very physically gifted set of individuals, and they show all of these signs of local adaptation to the environment in which they've been living for thousands and thousands of years. For instance, I mean, the heart-shaped herb. Right? I mean, this is a really sort of special endemic plant to Wakanda, and it's infused with this vibranium that it also occurs for the most part only within Wakanda.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in the comic books, Killmonger is actually an outsider. And so in one of the storylines that's presented, it kind of mirrors what happens in the movie, where he comes and challenges for the throne and through ritualistic combat defeats T'Challa. But what happens when it's come time to ingest the heart-shaped herb and sort of receive the mantle of the Black Panther, he actually slips into a coma because his physiology isn't meant or hasn't been exposed to the vibranium that's kind of permeated throughout Wakandan society. And so he actually is impacted in a negative way because of that.
Yeah. And also, we sort of see, this, a stark difference between Wakandans and the rest of us, in the last Avengers movie, right? When, these aliens, they drop down and invade Wakanda. And what we see is, obviously you have the Avengers that assemble, but then also, right, pretty much all of Wakanda, right, takes up arms and, and gets into the fight. Now, I don't know if you guys remember the first Avengers movie, but when the T'Challa got to New York City, that is not what happened at all. People were like, running around, had no idea what to do. Right? So, the fact that you have these individuals that are able to stand with, such gifted individuals as the Avengers, I think really speaks to their strength and their endurance. So that in combination with, with this sort of the seemingly local adaptation to the toxins in the heart-shaped herb that allows them to actually take it in and then get its benefits, right, suggests that there are actually genetic changes in this population that differentiate it from the rest of the populations on the planet. And obviously, in the real world, when we look across the vast diaspora of human ethnicities and cultures and geographic regions, we see these patterns of local adaptation in our own genomes, right? So if we look at populations in high altitude environments, right? Andeans, Tibetans, Ethiopians, right? They have undergone specific genetic changes that allow them to operate in these oxygen poor environments. If we go to towards the equator, populations that have been living towards the equator in these really warm environments have genetic changes that lead to morphological changes in shape and size that allow them to deal with the extreme temperatures that occur at the equator, and the same at the poles, right? So if we think about Inuits, they have a very different body composition that allows them to retain heat much better. Again, because they've been living in these environments for many, many, many generations. So when we're thinking about this idea of genetics and culture, it brings up the idea, this classic idea of nature versus nurture. What makes us who we are as individuals? Is it the environment that we live in? Is it our genetic predisposition to whatever, or is it some combination of the two? And in the movie, we really see this, I think, come out in this ultimate conflict between T'Challa and Killmonger, in the sense that in the movie, in the MCU. These are really closely related individuals. They're both members of the same bloodline, the royal family's bloodline. And they're really sort of eerily similar. They're kind of like mirrors of each other in a lot of ways, in the sense that they both have this sense of duty and obligation to their people, but it means something very different to each of them. And each of them has come up with a very different approach to achieve that betterment of their respective peoples. But obviously they're genetically related, but they've grown up in really different environments. So in order to get a better feel for this idea of nature versus nurture and how the two interact, I asked Sebastian a little bit about his own research and what we are beginning to learn about how the environment influences our genes, and exactly what that means for who we are as individuals.
So this whole nature, and nature component of how we all develop is incredibly important. And I wrote about it just because of this whole duality between T'Challa and was it Killmonger or was it Eric Stevens, I think it is?
Yeah.
And the fact that the two of them really, it's kind of an interesting thought experiment to just have switched them at birth and wonder if the same events of Black Panther would have transpired the way that they did. When you think of somebody like Eric Stevens, growing up in Oakland, obviously having to fend for himself, he's had to become far more socially resilient given the environment that he was raised in, and compared to someone like T'Challa, who literally was royalty, right? He was a prince. He got to get the best education, got to be taken care of by the very best. The two of them come from the same lineage. They're both royalty. Both of their parents were brothers. There's this type of, what if one was in the other's place? So my training in molecular biology, I came I did my PhD at McGill University in Montreal, where I got to work with Moshe Sif. Now, at the time that I joined his lab, him and Michael Meany had just published a paper looking at how a model of maternal care could actually change a chemical modification that gets made to DNA, and how this one maternal behavior could shape how this gene got expressed, and then later in life have an effect on the responses of behavior, specifically anxiety, in stressful types of situations. So this was kind of very neat nature, or specifically nurture, contribution of how, let's say, maternal care, which in this case was just a mother who wouldn't lick and groom her pup, would actually cause one of these important genes related to stress responses to turn on and turn off, and then change their behavior down the road. So it's kind of neat in the sense that there's really this huge component of environment that can contribute to how an individual, whether you're a rat or a mouse or a human, the specific mechanism that we're talking about is called DNA methylation. And it's a really interesting way of kind of seeing how we can actually measure the effects of environment on individual genes and how they can possibly result in certain kinds of behavior. Perhaps in the case of Black Panther, a behavior where you kind of felt that you were wrong, that you had to fight your way out of adversity, only to make it as far as Eric Stevens did, to find out that things weren't necessarily as fair as they really should have been, when you think of somebody on the other side of the coin, like T'Challa, who really got everything he could have possibly wanted, as well as, loving parents that took care of him whenever they could. And Eric Stevens didn't get any of these things.
Yeah, so there's this really complex interaction between our genes and the environment that we live in, and we're only just now starting to really understand all the different ways that the environment can interact with our genes. Obviously, we've known for a while about this process of local adaptation, where you get natural selection on genetic variation, but now we're looking at aspects of what those genes produce and how the environment can actually change the way that genes are expressed by these tags. And we're also starting to learn that, at least in mammals, right, those changes that we see can also in some cases be passed on across generations, sometimes multiple generations. So we're in the process of trying to understand exactly what does this mean, why is it important, how does it happen? So all these questions at the forefront of biology still.
Yeah, and I think just even from a fan perspective, the thing that Marvel does so well with their villains is just adding a sense of nuance. And, for me, I think the most boring villain in the world is just the big bad that shows up and then runs around and destroys stuff, and you have to get together to fight him just because he's overpowering and he's bad.
I feel like you're just talking about Thanos right now.
Yeah, no, not necessarily, because I think the whole point there is that the best villains actually expose the weaknesses in our heroes and cause them to take moments of self-reflection. And I think Thanos is kind of included in that category. So it's why we love villains like Loki or Magneto or Thanos or even the Joker, right? Because they cause us to have that sense of self-reflection. And so in the case of T'Challa and Killmonger, Killmonger's basic premise is, if you have the ability to help someone, you have a moral obligation to do so. And that's really hard to argue against. I mean, maybe he implements that ideal in a way that's, debatable, but fundamentally, I think that's a principle worth preserving. And so with that, T'Challa actually has to sort of take it upon himself to reflect on the history of his people and where the nation has gone from a historical sense, and acknowledge and give thanks to those that have come before him, but also have the courage to admit where they went wrong and take it upon himself to lead the nation in a new and better direction. And I think that's where you see the film resolve as a relation to the conflict that he experienced with Killmonger. So, kind of fascinating stuff there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so, basically, I mean, this is the world of Wakanda, right? It's this complex interaction of, history and society and biology and technology, and all of these things intertwine in all these really complex and intricate ways in order to create, this fantastical place that we see and these amazing people that live in it. And then, of course, right, this really special hero, T'Challa, and his mantle as the Black Panther and protector of his nation. So with that, I want to say, this was super fun.
Yeah, as always.
Always.
Love
This is our
doing
second
it
time
live.
doing this.
Yeah,
and
doing it live.
Yeah, and it's always a little nerve-wracking doing these things live, right? Because you can't just edit on the fly when you're on a stage and people are staring at you.
Yeah.
But this has been a lot of fun. And so we'd love to take a few questions if we have time. But first, I want to thank, the International Wildlife Film Festival, obviously,
Yes.
second time out here. All the staff, everybody's working super hard. They put together just an absolutely amazing lineup through the entire week. And also a special thanks to Jerry Rafter, Alana Waxman, and Tammy Bodlovic for allowing us to come up here, helping us set things up,
Yep,
organizing
tech
our
support, all that.
just everything, because we would not be up here without them. Rest assured, we would certainly not be up here. We'd probably be at the airport somewhere crying. So anyway, thank you guys so much for listening to us, and we'd love to hear what you guys have to say.